Hello, good evening, and welcome to the program. This is Daily Politics. I'm Abdullahi Ahmed. Tonight on the program, we have a sit down with one of Nigeria's most incisive political analysts and fearless commentators, Professor Farooq Kperogi. Known for his piercing critiques, unflinching prose, as well as unwavering scrutiny of power, Kperogi has stirred both admiration and controversy with his writings on the state of the nation. In one of his latest commentaries, he argues that President Bola Tinubu's greatest political asset heading into 2027 might not be the strength of his policies, but the chaos and complacency of a fragmented opposition. Is Nigeria headed for another term of economic turmoil and elite impunity, or is there hope for a credible political reset? We'll explore the hard truths and uncomfortable questions, as well as the path forward, if there is one. Professor Farooq Kperogi joins us live from Atlanta in the United States. Prof, good evening from Nigeria. I suppose it's good afternoon to you over there. Thank you most kindly for joining us on Daily Politics.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Right. First and foremost, Prof, just explain the double entendre or the word play there. Tinubu is not going to win. The opposition is simply going to lose in 2027. What made you reach that conclusion?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And the reasoning behind that conclusion was based on my observation of the politics of the opposition. And as you noted, I said it's very fragmented. It's provincial, disappointingly provincial. A lot of the opposition to the Tinubu presidency appears to be coming from the north. And that is a gift. That's a rhetorical and emotional gift, Tinubu. It's going to help him to strengthen his southern coalition, and it's going to help him to appeal to parts of the north that don't consider themselves mainstream, that don't consider themselves hegemonic. So apart from the fact that the opposition is not concentrated on one political party, the PDP appears to be weakened internally by Tinubu's men, led by Nyesom Wike, and the SDP that Erufai has hopped onto and is encouraging other opposition elements to go into is suspected to be a political party that was initially formed by Tinubu as a fallback option should he be denied the APC nomination. The candidate of the SDP in the last election was indistinguishable from Tinubu. I had the pleasure of interviewing him here, and his policies, his programs were all a reflection of Tinubu. Of course, he has come out openly to criticize Tinubu and his policies after the elections. But when you look at the opposition in totality, I think they are weakened by one, provincialism, two, lack of strategic acumen, to really take on Tinubu, and then third, what I call rhetorical ineptitude. When you are the opposition, you are trying to appeal to a broad base of people, but you are hearkening back to very narrow, primordial, ethnic cocoon. That's self-sabotage. And I'm making reference to the statement credited to Dr. Hakeem Baba Ahmed, who said that the North is going to oppose Tinubu's second term, and that he invited other regions of the country, but that if they would not come, fine, they would go ahead and defeat Tinubu anyway, because no one ever became president of Nigeria without the North's support. That is problematic for historical reasons, because as I pointed out in my article, in 2003, Obasanjo won re-election without getting overwhelming support from the North. In 2011, Goodluck Jonathan also got support. I mean, won election without getting overwhelming support from the North. So to make that kind of self-sabotaging boast, you are basically handing rhetorical, political, symbolic ammunition to the person in power, because all he needs to win is to whip up sentiments that suggest that the North is suffering from a power withdrawal syndrome. They can't afford to be outside of power, so they want to get it back. Not because they want to improve your lot, but because they feel isolated. They feel like fish out of water
Right.
from power. So that's in politics. That's a very powerful symbolism to mainstream. That's why I say the opposition might lose. Not because Tinubu has won, which sort of seems self-contradictory in terminology, but basically that's what I'm saying. That the objective conditions for Tinubu's loss are there. The economy has tanked. A lot of people can't afford to eat. There's insecurity everywhere. There's a sense of siege that surrounds everybody. And so typically in such circumstances, people choose to have a different government to see maybe another person is going to come and give us a different way of governing. But the way the opposition is carrying on is taking the conversation out of that realm to the realm of emotions. And emotions are very strong instruments for political mobilization. It's all over the world. Even here in the United States where I live, emotions are typically mobilized for political ends.
Right. And Prof, if we have to double down on that, you talk about the regional context of the conversation. We're seeing a weaponization of regional sentiments take center stage. Case in point, the argument made by Dr. Hakim Babamed, whose position you've criticized in that article of yours. Give me a sense of whether your conclusion is driven by if a northern candidate is supposed to be the main opposition candidate in 2027. What if there's somebody else from the south, for instance, like Peter Obi going against President Bola Ahmed Tinubu? Does that change the equation for you?
Yeah, of course it does. Because and I actually pointed that out in my article that right now the prevailing sentiment in the country, particularly in the South, is that this is the moment for the South. Buhari was president for 8 years. Within those 8 years, no Southerner opposed his presidency. The only person who contested against him for a second term was a Northerner. It's the same in 2003. When the South had power from 1999 until 2007, the first part of Obasanjo's ascendance to power was instrumentalized by the North out of a pragmatic consideration. The nation was in turmoil. There were internal dissensions. There were fears that the country was going to collapse. And the Northern establishment came together and said, look, let's hand over power to the South. And then it instituted this informal power sharing arrangement. After 8 years, it's going to go to the North and then back again. And so in 2003, the North presented a very powerful opponent to Obasanjo. And again, when it was the turn of the South to produce a president in 2023, sorry, the North also presented a very powerful opponent. So if you look at it historically, it appears that the North is often impatient, to wait its turn in the informal power rotation scheme. So if at this point we have another powerful Northerner come out to oppose Tinubu's re-election, it's going to resonate, in the South that these guys want power back, not so much to better our lot, but because they can't afford to be out of power for too long. And so if the opposition presents a credible, powerful Southerner with national appeal, then the chances of defeating Tinubu become really, really high. But they cannot do that with the rhetoric, with the kind of rhetoric that Dr. Hakim Baba Ahmed is championing, which is that we in the North are the ones who are putting that Southerner there. At least even, give people the sense that we are relating on an equal term with other parts of the country to bring in someone who is credible, who can get us out of this morass, out of this existential torment that we are all wallowing in. So the rhetoric is very important. The rhetoric of provincial arrogance weakens the opposition. And I think that's the major point that I'm making.
Yeah, and part of that is to say that it's been done before, that someone can be president without the North, because Dr. Hakim Baba Ahmed's position is that, listen, you can't do this without the North. So one way or the other, you have to come to the table to negotiate the support that you need to win in 2027. And he said the North is not a monolith. There is that part of the North that might not be considered in Dr. Hakim Baba Ahmed's comment. How does that actually work? How can someone be president without necessarily securing the support of the North?
Well, as I said earlier, we saw that in 2003. Obasanjo realized that he had become extremely unpopular in a huge slice of the North, which is the Muslim North, but specifically the Hausaphone Muslim North. So what did he do? He tried to cultivate the attention of parts of the North that don't fit that definition. So he appointed a lot of people from the Christian North and got a lot of votes from that part of the North. He also appealed to parts of the North that are not Hausaphone, but that are Muslim, such as Kogi, Kwara. And so he effectively divided the North and got a chunk of the votes there that he now added to the South, which gave him the numerical superiority that he had in 2003. Of course, the elections were rigged. There's no question about that, because Obasanjo got more votes in Ogun than there were registered voters. But that's overzealousness. He would have won that election even if he didn't rig. So that was the point I tried to make. Jonathan did the same thing. Jonathan did the exact same thing. It was the same template. So when Baba Ahmed said you cannot win without the North, I mean, he assumes that the North is a monolith, that is one collective, people who have no dissensions, who come together and always agree on everything and vote the same way. That has never happened historically. Historically, right from the First Republic, the North had always had political splinters, even within the Muslim North, even within the Hausaphone Muslim North. Kano has always voted separately, historically, and Borno to a large extent. So to think and speak of the North as if it were always one collective, monolithic entity with no differentiation is both sociologically inaccurate and historically wrong.
Right. Okay.
And so that's the point I was trying to make.
All right. Let's have a listen to what Dr. Hakim Baba Ahmed had to say earlier in the day. He had a sit down with some journalists in Kaduna just to double down on some of his points along while making the point of why he resigned from his role as special advisor to the president on political matters. Here's the thoughts of Dr. Hakim Baba Ahmed.
Dr. Hakim Baba Ahmed broke his silence in Kaduna, expressing deep concerns about Nigeria's political, economic and security challenges. He revealed that during his time in office, he didn't have the opportunity to truly advise President Tinubu. However, given the worsening situation in the country, he said he now feels compelled to speak up. The former aide emphasized that Nigeria is at a critical juncture and can no longer afford to recycle the same political class. According to him, the only viable way forward is to hand over the baton to a younger, more innovative generation capable of driving meaningful change. With political alignment and realignment already shaping conversation ahead of 2027, Baba Ahmed pointed out that many of the familiar political faces no longer have any business in governance and should step aside.
This country belongs to your generation and your children. Our own is finished. We've done our own. We've made a lot of mistakes. We've done a few good things. All these people running, changing places in political parties, they have no business in government. They are finished. They should leave for younger generation Nigerians. Make your own mistakes. Fix them.
He also advised those
Right, part of Bello Musa's report there, of course, the thoughts of Dr. Hakim Baba Ahmed. A part of the message there was that he was calling on President Bola Ahmed Tinubu to step aside and present a much younger person to take the reins, which he says would definitely rejuvenate Nigeria's political dynamics going forward. And of course, those are the thoughts of someone who has been in the news lately for his resignation and then his subsequent take on the state of affairs. Prof, what do you make of that particular call, that the president should force the hands of the opposition? Because if he decides to go with someone else instead of himself on the ticket, the whole situation changes and we might witness a rejuvenation of our political affairs in the country. Do you think that that is something that might even be considered by the president?
Well, first of all, I agree with a lot of the things he said. Our political culture is oppressively gerontocratic. The same people who have been in power since independence are still somehow hanging around the corridors of power. And younger people with fresher ideas have no chance to emerge on the scene. So on that note, I agree with him that we need to create a process where younger people who may have fresher ideas emerge on the scene. Maybe, just maybe, they might move us in a different direction. But of course, we know that Tinubu has a single-minded obsession with getting a second term. You don't need a political soothsayer to know that he would never heed Dr. Hakim Baba Ahmed's advice. That much is clear. But there's also the cynical side of me. And of course, cynicism is an intrinsic, it's an abiding attribute of any scientist, any scholar, anyone who investigates the truth, who is inquisitive. So I realize that we are products of the political culture, the political socialization that we are brought up in. And the structure of Nigeria, the politics that has enhanced and has enabled, has created a class of people who are indistinguishable from the older generation. So the fact that you are young is no guarantee that you're going to be better than the older person if you do not transcend the very things that you condemn or you criticize in the older people. Part of the reason, for instance, that I was not enthusiastic in the 2023 election was that all the major presidential candidates had the exact same programs and said the same things, had the same rhetoric, and nothing was different. So it didn't matter who became president as far as I was concerned, the effect was going to be the same. And I see the same thing right now, whether the youth or the older generation or people in between, the conception of what power should constitute or what it should deliver to the people, our understanding of the relationship between the state and the citizens is basically one and the same thing. The difference between six and half a dozen. I haven't seen any presidential candidate that has inspired me and that is charting a completely radical and different course from what Tinubu is currently doing. So we are going to change, or we are hoping to change one set of, faces with another. But the programs, the realities that lead us to where we are will remain basically unchanged. And that's my worry. No one is talking about, for instance, subsidies. There's no functional democracy in the world. There's no functional, real, living, breathing country in the world that runs on the basis of the political philosophy that the masses of the people do not deserve to have subsidies of any sort. I live in the United States, the wealthiest country in the world, the patron saint of democracy, the inspiration behind a lot of these policies that our people are aping sheepishly, mechanically, without thought. But we are beneficiaries of all kinds of subsidies, petrol subsidies, agricultural subsidies, and we are getting just a little bit of what people in the third world are forced to do, and there's already chaos. Republicans cannot go and have face-to-face meetings with their constituents because people are feeling the bite of increase in prices of commodities and things like that. But no one is having that conversation. We're talking about power moving from one set of elites to the other without any conversation about substantive issues. So until I see a presidential candidate who comes out to say, look, we cannot run a country based on recommendations imposed upon us by the IMF and World Bank. We have to come up with homegrown economic policies that are sensitive to our people's needs. We are a poor country. We are a communal nation. We come from cultures where people are required to help each other. I was telling someone some time ago that I spend a lot of money on my relatives and friends of relatives, not so much because I have an option, but because I'm a product of that culture. When I was going to university, a lot of people gave me money that were not my parents, that were not even my relatives. And therefore, I have an abiding need to pay it forward. So when you come from that culture, and most people are going to tell you that in their rise to wherever they were helped by a lot of people, by communities. When I was young, I know that the people who are doing medical training in my community used to benefit from the community putting money together. These are people who are not even related, but because they were studying medicine in the university, they'll bring money together and send them. We come from that culture, and someone tells me that giving subsidies to people to make life a little easier is somehow alien. And therefore, we need to have a system that strips subsidies away from people. And the president brags about it, and he says he's bold to have removed subsidies. And people are suffering. There's so much torment in the land. And that also activates insecurity because people need to survive. So I need us to have a conversation about that, but no one seems to be having that sort of conversation. It's about the faces of people in power without any attempt to change the conversation about our economic well-being.
Right. And Prof, let's talk about recent developments. We've seen this wave of defection hit particularly the PDP. Case in point, developments in the south part of the country, in Delta State to be specific, from this past week to this week. The former president, the former governor, I beg your pardon, Dr. Okoa, and the current Minister of Aviation had this to say about the Tinubu administration, saying that, listen, for peace and political stability, Tinubu needs to go another 4-year term, right? Where does that stand side by side with the idea of a democracy where elections determine who gets what position to represent the yearnings and aspirations of the people? Do you think this idea of power rotation is pushing us gradually to jettison the idea of elections determining who gets what position?
Well, I actually wrote about this, and I said in a past column that we need to systematize and constitutionalize rotation of power between regions and within regions. Why did I say that? Because we are a country that is a patchwork of disparate people, different histories, different socialization, different cultures. And democracies in Africa are basically ethnocracies. By ethnocracy, I mean a government that is dominated by people, by the ethnic group of the person in power. That's what it is. And if it is dominated by one group, if it doesn't rotate, it's a recipe for instability, for communal upheaval, and for even potential collapse of the nation itself. And I defended this by saying, look, there's no practice of democracy, there's no universal practice of democracy. In the United States, where I have lived for the last 2 decades, the presidential election is not a one person, one vote model. It's the electoral college. You vote for people. There are parts of Nigeria, of the United States, where it's almost pointless to vote. If you are a Democrat, for instance, and you live in Mississippi, there's no point voting because the vast majority of people in Mississippi are going to vote Republican anyway. And therefore, your vote doesn't count. So a lot of people just stay back and not vote. If you live in California and you are a Republican, there's no point voting because it won't count. It's the person who wins the vote count in these states gets the electoral votes. And that's the way to do it. In Switzerland, the practice of democracy is completely different as well. Even the term democracy, from Greece, where we got that term, the way it was practiced, it was just the elite who could vote. It was men. Women couldn't vote. People who had property were the ones who could vote. In the United States, women were not allowed to vote until fairly recently. Black people were not allowed to vote. Even white people were not allowed to vote if they were not propertied. So there's no universal application of democracy. And one of the problems we've had as a people is the desire, the tendency for a wholesale, uncritical acceptance of the values and structures and practices of people who are not us. If we are Africans and we are wedded to our identities, and that's the truth, we are Africans and we are wedded to our identities. These identities are invariable. If you are a Bachama man, you always be one. It doesn't matter where you are born. An Ogoni man cannot become a Fulani man. But Democrats can become Republicans, Republicans can become Democrats. Yeah, these categories are sort of fixed here and they have almost become tribal groupings. So it's worse for us. So this a sensitivity, a political culture that shows sensitivity to the invariable nature of our identities is one way to make democracy stick, to make it worth our while, and to not make it an instrument for instability. So I actually am a firm believer in the rotation of power between the regions and within the regions. And we've seen Niger State, for instance, where the governorship moves from one region to the other. Every political party adjusts itself to that expectation. I hear that the same arrangement happens in a place like, I think, Delta State and a few other places. No one region becomes governor for more than 8 years at a time. And so there's a sense of inner stability within those political spaces. We can replicate that at the national level, constitutionalize it, systematize it, so that every political party, in fact, from my perspective, it ensures that the best personal rules. If all the candidates for election, for instance, are from, say, the Southwest, the capacity or the likelihood of mobilizing collective sentiments would go. And so we're going to be looking at their programs. Who is best for the nation? No one is going to say, vote for me because I'm from the South, or because I'm a Muslim, or because I'm a Christian. That consideration goes away because every political party in the country has the candidate from that region. And so it's left for the rest of us who are not from that region to choose the best of what they have presented to us. And then when the needle turns to the other region, it's going to be that. But right now, it's possible for someone who is incompetent, who is inept, who is divisive, who is destructive to emerge president because they can exploit and mobilize collective sentiments in their favor. So I think for democracy to thrive, we have to domesticate it.
Right.
We have to understand parts of it that cause us, inner rupture. And so I think it's a good practice, but we need to systematize it.
Right. What about this concern that has been raised? Because some of the comments that follow the defections of the PDP structure in Delta State, for instance, have left a lot of people feeling concerned. The governor, for months, has been talking about his support for President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, which a lot of people consider is anti-party, given that he is a governor on the platform of the PDP. But beyond that, they're doubling down on this alignment with the center to get the best for the state. What does that say? I mean, it's clearly looking like a trend that is fast becoming a phenomenon where you have to align with the center if you want the best for your state. What does that say about the administration? But if you zoom out, what does that say about our democracy if political parties or political leaders have to pander to the center to get some sort of perks come their way?
It's ironic that is happening because Tinubu spent his entire political career swimming against the mainstream, swimming against the center. In 1999, he was in AD. In 2003, when he, along with other southern governors, decided to support Tinubu, and then he lost all the other governors to PDP. He remained in ACN or ACN, and has always been someone who resisted the temptation to align with the center just for the sake of it. So it's ironic that someone with that history is encouraging the dissolution of our political structure to even give you the semblance of democracy, of diversity and multiplicity of political tendencies that we've always had. I think that's horrible, and it makes no sense of this whole idea of even federalism. A federal structure should be one that respects its constituent units, where people don't have to kiss the ring of the president or whoever is at the head of the center to get whatever it is that they want. And I've always found the rhetoric of not wanting to be left out of the center to be a holdover of our military past, where everything centers around the center, around the Abuja. Unfortunately, it's a tendency that has that's not new. We've seen it multiple times from the past, where people said, look, being in opposition deprives you of access to the perks that come from being close to the center. But that defeats the entire notion of federalism, not just democracy, but federalism, which we are supposed to be. Our former name is the Federal Republic of Nigeria. But if people feel that if they are not part of the center, they cannot get what they deserve, then let's stop the pretense of saying we're a federal republic. We are not. We're a unitary republic. But I think it's a self-justifying rhetoric to legitimize political prostitution. That's what it is, basically.
Right. What are your thoughts about the concern that people have that, you know what, if you join the ruling party, all sins are forgiven? Case in point, some of the corruption cases that some of these political figures are dealing with the EFCC, for instance. Do you think there's something there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I made passing reference to that. I call that EFCC prosecutorial threat. EFCC prosecutorial threat. That happens all the time. I recall being one of the first to expose Danjuma Goje's dalliance with the Buhari administration sometime at the nascent stages of 2019 after the election. I think Ahmed Lawan was the candidate of the president, and Danjuma Goje wanted to be Senate president as well. He had more support, or had the potential to destabilize the plan of the presidency, and he was called to the villa and told that if he gave up his aspirations, the 25 billion naira EFCC trial he was undergoing would be dropped. And when I exposed that, it appeared at the time that I was making it up to make the government feel look bad, but that threat has been dropped. He's not being investigated over the 25 billion naira that he was accused by the EFCC to have embezzled. And so it's the EFCC has become a poodle, a police dog that is unleashed on people that the government doesn't like. And it's a cudgel to make people, go to the mainstream or to align with the people in power. So I think that's possibly. So I predicted or suggested that there were two reasons why people are doing the defection. One, as the rhetoric from the opposition, what constitutes the opposition now, which is taking on a very arrogant, self-lionizing, provincial trend, is pushing people in the South to say, well, we'd rather be with our own, because this is our time, than be bullied by the North that had had its time.
Right.
And that was exactly what happened in 2003. As I mentioned, the Alliance for Democracy, the Yoruba Party, collapsed and then merged with PDP, and he couldn't recover from that. Why? Was because the North was seen to be opposing. But then the second is the threat of prosecution. Most of these people, did things that could not be legally defended. And so everyone who has ever ruled is potentially susceptible to prosecution for whatever it is that they committed while they were in office. So it's a very powerful, strong cudgel to bludgeon people into submission. So yeah, there's that. Adams Oshiomhole was famously said, when you move to APC, all your sins are going to be forgiven. He said that in Edo State sometime in 2018, if I'm not mistaken. So we see that that's what I think is at play. The two forces, the regional solidarity or resentment against what is perceived to be regional arrogance, and then of course wanting to save their necks from EFCC prosecution for things they may have committed while they were governors.
Right, let's double down on that. The regional sentimentality as well as the regionalization of the political conversation. If you look at the South, you talk about political history. The South has always been divided in terms of its voting blocks. For instance, the South-South and the Southeast is predominantly usually PDP, especially the South-South. Now we're witnessing a remaking of that political map. The APC is making a lot of inroads in the South-South, for instance. Talk to me about one particular point that you made in your article about this accusation of the administration being tribalistic or nepotistic. You also say that the presidency's response has been less than satisfactory. In fact, they have not provided enough data to suggest that the distribution of political appointments are even or are equitable in terms of its distribution across regions. Some have used that to galvanize the support across the North, for instance, to say, listen, if this administration is not going to consider Northerners in its appointments, maybe it's high time we present someone else who can actually consider this part of the country. And you also made the point about the recent committee that has been set up to look into the census, with the Northeast, for instance, the South-South and the Southeast being neglected. And you mentioned that also there are some there's a domination of one particular ethnic group in that. Do you think that is also something that could count against the president in spite of everything else that you've said about what's happening on the other side of the aisle?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a sense that he has been rather reckless in the appointments into strategic positions, and the response. When I posted that, I got responses, personal insults, and some that pretend to be factual corrections of what I wrote. pointing out a list of this distribution, but there's a difference between ordinary numbers and the symbols that the numbers represent. And what the president has been accused of is not so much the number of appointees he has given. It is the valence that is attached to the positions he has given to his own region and his own ethnic group. So like right now, I read one funny, satirical, but nonetheless factual post about how it is now possible for the president to convene a meeting of the people who command the economy, the top heights of the economy, and basically, hold the meeting in Yoruba, because almost everyone who is there, understand the same language, apart from the Minister of Budget and Planning. So he'll be the odd one out there. So it's entirely possible to have a meeting on the economy of the nation and conduct it in the Yoruba language. Of course, I'm always forced to point out that Buhari did something similar in security. The security apparatus was dominated by Northerners, Hausa-speaking Northerners. It used to be said that it was possible to hold a security meeting about the country and conduct it in Hausa with just one person being left out. So these accusations are credible, and in a nation that is riven by multiple strands of primordial cleavages, I think it's reckless to allow that kind of thing to happen. And people who feel alienated, people who are angry, people who feel that there is no sufficient sensitivity being shown to our diversity, I think are justified. So if people on the basis of that decide to reject the president, I think that's entirely justified. The Southeast, though, is almost completely left behind, right from Buhari's time until now. And I would have thought that given Tinubu's famed political sophistication, he would at least make some symbolic moves to get people from the Southeast to be a part of the government, like prominent symbolic appointments. I'm not talking about just senior or special assistants that the presidency rolled out the other time. But even in that, the Southeast was poorly represented. So, but in elections, of course, sometimes some emotions override the others. So we don't know, even a minute is a long time in politics.
Right.
We do not know what factors will ultimately determine people's voting patterns, people's voting behaviors, and their preferences. We do not know for sure. But for right now, I think those are legitimate reasons to reject the government, apart from the poor economy, the tanking naira to dollar exchange and all that.
Right.
But who knows what's going to happen in 2 years? We don't have a crystal ball to gaze into the future. But what you pointed out are very legitimate fears, legitimate criticism against the government.
All right. So let's have a listen to the acting national chairman of the PDP, his response to recent developments, those political defections, especially in Delta, and what that does to the PDP's support base in the South-South. The thoughts of Ambassador Damagun.
They can coerce, like I said earlier, cajole and intimidate our members into joining them. But they can only do that because they feel they have what it takes. When the time comes, they will receive the result from Nigerians. It has happened before, and it will repeat itself. The parameters that will make Nigerians revolt against them is all in place. This government has been so insensitive to the yearnings and feelings of people. They have nothing so far. They have not shown any remorse. We are not conquered people. We are Nigerians, tax-paying Nigerians, law-abiding citizens, and we have rights. And when the time comes, Nigerians will show them that they have rights.
Ambassador Damagunde reacting following a National Working Committee emergency meeting of the PDP in Abuja earlier in the day. In reaction to developments in Delta, they did also call on the governor of Delta State to resign his position because he won that election on the platform of the PDP. And of course, he did have a lot more to say about this one. Prof, the former governor of Kaduna State, Professor, I beg your pardon, Malam Nasir Rufai, also says, listen, a governor has just one vote, just like any other person. And he says that, listen, this is a lot of movement without a lot of motion, that at the end of the day, the people will decide on election day. But to your point about what's happening on the opposition side and how weakened their operations have been over the past year or so, to use a football analogy, which I think a lot of Nigerians will appreciate, is that it's one thing for a team's defense to be bad. It's another thing for the offensive team to have the good attack to actually score a goal, right? Talk to me about what's happening on the opposition side, because you also made a note of the spare car, which is the SDP, that has been gaining some traction recently. And you're saying that, listen, they're walking into a trap. There's a tinubu element in the SDP that these political figures might not be able to override if that's the platform they want to use in 2027.
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to take on what Erifai said about every governor having just one vote. Of course, you and I know that that's not the way democracy works. Democracy works on the principle of what in communication studies we call the multi-step flow theory. That is that in communities, in democratic communities, we have opinion leaders. These opinion leaders shape political opinions and they shape political behaviors and political cultures. There are a lot of people who vote not because they have arrived at decisions on themselves, on their own, but because someone they trust, says this is the best person for us. We saw that in Britain. The Brexit movement was powered by opinion leaders who influenced people to vote against, now we know in retrospect, their interests. Here in the United States, we had the same thing. We had an election where a lot of people voted against their interests because they listened to people who shaped their opinions about the political process and about who was going to bring about relief for them. So I think it's naive to say if a prominent, influential politician, does something that's just one vote that is lost. That's not the way politics works. That's not the way democracy works. We know we are a gregarious people. We know we are part of communities, and those communities are led by people. They shape opinions, they mold opinions, they influence how people vote. So I think it's good rhetoric, it's good self-comforting rhetoric, but the truth is that if you lose an influencer, you are losing more than just that one person. You are losing the people that he influences as well. Of course, I'm aware that sometimes people's material conditions conflict with what the people they respect say, and because of that, they change course. There have been instances where people say, well, I respect this guy, I have always followed him, but right now, the circumstances are such that we cannot say for certain what is going to happen. If I were a political strategist, I might say in public that we just lost one vote, and that's inconsequential. But when I go to strategize, I'm going to say, well, this is not just one vote. That's multiple votes from one person. And in the case of Nigeria, we know it's even beyond molding political opinion or influencing votes. It's also monetary. It's mercenary. A lot of people vote because they have been promised financial benefits for doing so. So people who have resources can get people to vote in certain ways. And I wrote a piece some time ago and said, we have a tendency to shame people who collect money from politicians to vote. And I said, the only time most Nigerians have a reason to interact with politicians is during elections. After that, it's gone. For the first time in Nigerian political history, in 2014, 2015, poor people actually contributed money to Buhari to get him elected. And then they realized that they were actually way worse off than they were when they collected money from politicians to vote for them. So it makes no difference whether you get money or you are giving money. And basically it means that whoever gives money, the most money, tends to have the most votes. That's if elections were free and fair. So to lose someone who has a capacity to give money to influence votes, or who has a capacity to influence public opinion in a certain direction, is not the loss of just that person. It's way more than that. And we've seen that in politics, in communication, in all spheres of life, because we are not individuals. And when people vote, they don't vote as individuals. Frankly, they vote as members of a community. They vote as members of either an invariable community or a variable community. And that's the way I see it.
Surely it's quite traditional of politicians to minimize whatever the opposition is doing just so they can get some sort of upper hand. Prof, for want of time, we're going to have to anchor the conversation here. Interesting take from you, and we do appreciate you for joining us on the program this evening. Thank you so much for your time, Professor Kperogi. We do appreciate you for joining us on Daily Politics.
It's my pleasure.
All right. And of course, with that, we wrap things up for tonight's edition of the program. Thank you most kindly for your time and company. Daily Politics returns tomorrow, live and exclusive on Trust TV. Until next time, I am Abdullahi Ahmed. Good evening.